Hello, my name is Judy Jablon. In this presentation, I'll talk with you about formative assessment. I believe that assessment is a must for teachers of young children, and I trust that by listening to this presentation, you'll deepen your understanding of the importance and value it can have for you as a professional. In this module, I will discuss 4 key ideas about formative assessment. 1. Assessment is a process that's part of teaching. 2. Formative assessment guides decision-making. 3. Formative assessment and interactions go hand in hand. And the last key idea describes the cycle of assessment, a 4-step process that helps make formative assessment purposeful. Let's look at the first key idea. Assessment is a process that's part of teaching. Often assessment can feel overwhelming and just another thing on your already overflowing plate. In this presentation, I'd like to frame your understanding of assessment as a process that helps you to be a responsible and accountable professional. As a teacher, you are a decision maker. You're shaping children's futures. Assessment is not an activity you do that's separate from or layered on top of your teaching. If you do it well, it's part of teaching, planning, and reflecting. Assessment can help you to make decisions about what and how to teach individuals and the group.
Edwin and Gabrielle and Luca, you can walk to the magnet shapes. If you would like to go to the block area with some rectangular prisms and some cars, go ahead, honey.
I try and set up my classroom so the kids can be independent and engage in each area where they're working.
I found the police.
You did, you found the police car. Gabriella, did you want to show me something? Yeah? Can I come see it? I think this is called an excavator. An excavator digs in the ground at a construction site. Digs a big hole. All right, Miss Gabriella. Wow. Look at all of these blocks stacked on top of each other. So here I notice you have a lot of blocks stacked up, a lot of rectangular prisms. It's a hotel. Tell me about this hotel. The mom and the dad? Okay, so the mom and the dad are at the hotel in Chelsea. And what are they doing here? They're going to stay in a room? Yeah. Do you think they're going to have any adventures or explore in Chelsea?
You know, I'm not sure if she was sitting there independently, if she would have thought out her plan as much and thought her reason for why she was doing the things that she was doing.
An adventure.
Oh, an adventure. They're going to go on an adventure.
The definition of assessment is using tools and processes for answering questions about children's learning in order to make informed decisions. There are different types of assessment. In this presentation, we'll focus on formative assessment, assessment to learn about and to plan for children's learning. The assessment instrument you use is different from the process of assessment. The use of research-based assessment instruments provides you with a clear and well-defined progression of learning. The instrument helps you know what is reasonable to expect of children at each age level. Assessment instruments should be aligned with national and state standards. But let's come back to the process of assessment, the focus of our conversation today. The Latin definition of assessment is to sit beside. Imagine a teacher sitting beside each of these children, curious to learn what they know and can do. What does it mean to be curious as you engage with children? My friend and colleague Margot Dichtermiller, in her book The Power of Assessment, uses this phrase, to have a stance of persistent curiosity. And by it she means staying open to what children have to teach you about their learning. When using assessment for teaching, being curious means to observe or watch and listen with intention. As you watch, listen, and interact with children, you ask yourself, what can I learn about the child and how the child approaches a task, how the child interacts with adults, how they interact with each other, Notice what materials a child chooses and how they use them. Another friend and my frequent co-author, Amy Dombrow, says, observing is watching from the outside with the purpose of trying to understand what children are feeling and experiencing on the inside. When you observe this way, you form connections, relationships with children. Now let's consider the second key idea. Formative assessment guides decision-making. Observing to learn how to respond is formative assessment. Formative assessment is defined as what you do day by day to guide decisions about teaching and learning. When you ask your students, how many of you know what we're going to do next? Raise your hands. You're assessing whether children understand the schedule of the day. We use formative assessment in our everyday lives. We go to the store and decide, what's on sale? What looks good? We're assessing to make decisions about what to buy and what to cook for dinner. And after dinner, we might say, this is summative assessment, as we think, this recipe's a keeper. I'll use it. Formative assessment in the classroom is about deciding how to respond to individual children, whether to extend an activity for a little longer so that children can engage more deeply in their work, whether to add props to the dramatic play area so that children can take on more roles. Summative assessment is what happens at intervals to take stock of how children are doing. With most instruments, we take stock or use summative assessment 3 times a year. At these 3 times, teachers pause to evaluate children's performance and progress. They determine ratings to inform their summary reports so that they can report information to families. They use summative assessment information to reflect on long-term plans. A question I want to ask you is, are you using formative assessment or doing it? Let's think about the difference. If I'm doing assessment, I'm collecting data to report it. I might think, oh, I have all this information, now I give it to someone else. But if I'm using assessment, I'm gathering information day by day to make decisions that are important to me. Every time I'm with a child or children, I'm wondering, what do they know? What are they interested in? What are they showing me right now that I can use to make wise decisions? What is your relationship with assessment? Are you using it or are you doing it? It's something to reflect on as we move forward. Now that we've discussed the first and second key ideas, let's turn our attention to the third key idea. Formative assessment and interactions go hand in hand. When you're using formative assessment, you observe and interact with students as they solve problems, write stories, do reports, make constructions, draw and paint, do experiments, and work with peers. This is also called authentic assessment because you use real-life classroom experiences and children's everyday performance as evidence of what children know and are able to do. Formative assessment not only looks at what children can do, but how they do it, the quality of their performance and skills. As Alana engages with these 3 kindergartners to practice making groups of 10, she observes to learn how each child accomplishes the task. What do they each understand about one-to-one correspondence? Who starts from 1 each time they count? Or who counts on? She adjusts her instruction in the moment based on what she is learning from observing. Alana successfully differentiates instruction because she is sensitive to the developmental differences among her students. As Alana provides this small group lesson about place value, she's monitoring how each child is doing so that she can adjust strategies to meet each child's needs. She understands child development, that each child progresses at a different rate. Meeting children where they are requires teachers to understand what to teach, how to modify instruction in ways that promote excitement for learning, and how to use assessment data to adjust instruction to respond to each child. When you use formative assessment, you are observing children with a stance of curiosity, which helps you form stronger relationships. You're getting to know children. You're learning to respect and appreciate each child as an individual. Research tells us that positive relationships lay the foundation for school success. Children are more likely to be emotionally and intellectually engaged in school when they have strong positive relationships with teachers. Think about a child with whom you have really hit it off. You had a positive relationship with that child quickly. Now think about a child with whom you have to really work to build that relationship. For whatever reason, you don't click. How did each relationship impact your effectiveness as a teacher? We know that building relationships is critical for effective teaching, learning, and assessment. When you have a strong relationship with each child and you know what and how to teach her, you can feel confident that you're being an effective decision maker. Formative assessment helps us build positive relationships with our students. How does it do that? Well, we watch and listen and learn. We use what we learn to connect with children. We watch their cues, the cues they give us that let us know that our invitations to connect are working. We continually observe with an open mind. Formative assessment helps us teach responsively so that we can meet each child where he or she is and extend learning in ways that are appropriate for that child. During arrival time, while children are working at centers, at snack time, by talking with families, by playing with children outdoors, sitting quietly and reading a book, each of these ways helps us connect. How do you connect with children who may have little or no verbal language? How do you connect with children who speak another language or who push your buttons? All children can build strong, positive relationships with you. For this to happen, it means thinking about yourself and learning about children. What teachers decide to say and do matters. The decisions you make have an impact on children and families. Every day you make hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions, both big and small. The more teachers use assessment, the less hit and miss those decisions will be. Basing decisions on knowledge of individual children is the essence of individualizing. When decisions are purposeful and intentional, you can do an even better job supporting children and families. Monroe offers research that reinforces how important it is to use the assessment cycle amidst teacher-child interactions. The greatest opportunity for learning lies in moments of teacher-child interaction when the teacher crafts learning experiences that stretch children just beyond their current skill level. Let's watch as Lori interacts with Ariel.
I joined Ariel curious to know how he was going to do with this book. I sort of had the expectation that he probably wasn't going to know a lot of the words, but I wanted to sort of see where he was. As I interacted with him, watched and waited and took notes, I was surprised by the number of words that he was able to read.
How did you know what that word said?
Because I know the word build.
You know that word build already too? Oh my goodness.
And I actually learned something about him because he told me at home that he reads all the time. Taking that time to sort of see where they were and talk to him about it and then take the time to sort of sit back for a minute really allowed me to learn a lot about him, more than I knew before he came in today.
Jessica is guided by questions she has about specific children, and so she plans with her para how they'll collect evidence to answer their questions.
I'm going to ask you a question now, and you guys can answer my question. I wanted to zone in on my ELL students, so I jotted down the names of the children I was going to focus on, and Suhei wrote down what they were saying, if they could complete a full sentence, and if they were focused on the actual question at hand.
What was your favorite part of the story?
He fall down in the tree.
You liked it when he fell out from the tree?
In a powerful interaction, there are 3 steps. Step 1, be present, is where you give yourself permission to pause, to observe, and quiet the static in your mind. Get off autopilot and really be ready to interact with the child. In step 2, connect. Remind the child that you and he have a relationship. Use the child's name. Ask permission to join. When you intentionally connect with a child, in order to extend that child's learning, you have a real chance of learning about the child, and the child can learn from you. Step 3 is extend learning. This means that you stretch the child's learning a little bit, having paused to be present, to observe and think, and then connect in a way that lets the child know you are interested in what he or she is doing right now. You can make a decision about how to scaffold the child's learning in a way that reflects both that child's agenda and the goals you've set. Let's watch this first using still photos. In step 1, be present. You watch and listen with intention to learn what is happening in the moment. If we think about using assessment as part of our interactions with children, we then enter the interaction with our stance of persistent curiosity. We observe and notice what the child's doing. What we see children do from the outside helps us to ask questions and wonder about what children are thinking, feeling, and experiencing on the inside. So let's imagine we're Joanna in this scene. She could enter it with an agenda, ready to teach, or she could enter with a sense of wonder. Her questions that can guide the interaction are, what's happening here? What can I learn from this child? What materials is she using, and how is she using them? Staying quiet and present, Joanna thinks, Marie is working alone. She's beginning a structure. She probably has a plan, but I'll watch for a few moments to see what happens. Then in step 2, she greets Marie at her eye level. Showing regard for student perspective, she asks permission to join. She waits for a response. Yep, says Marie. The conversation is already back and forth. Joanna continues to stay present and curious. She's already learning about Marie. Oh, Marie can take turns in conversation. She can respond appropriately to a question. She's comfortable interacting with adults. Being quiet for a few minutes allows her to assess and to give the child space to be the leader, to own the work, rather than to be pushed by the teacher's agenda. Now let's think about how you individualize your connection. Use what you already know about the child. Miss Joanna knows that this child gets deeply involved with blocks, that she starts slowly and gradually develops a plan. You actively listen to the child's cues before you say or do anything next. Let the child's response, nonverbal or verbal, guide your next decision about what to say and do. Marie takes some time to feel Miss Joanna's presence. Her response is a smile first, a pause, and then she says, yep. Imagine that we could see Maria's thoughts. She is saying to herself, I feel special when my teacher interacts with me. I know she cares about me. She's interested in my work. She wants to help me learn. Now, in step 3, extend learning, Joanna stays present and connected and begins to extend Marie's learning by attaching words to her actions. We call this mirror talk or parallel talk. And right then, using assessment, Joanna can make adjustments to what she says and does to continue to extend Marie's thinking. And finally, let's examine the last key idea, the cycle of assessment, a 4-step process that makes formative assessment purposeful. As you have a powerful interaction, you can also use the cycle of assessment. The cycle begins by asking questions. Then, as you interact, you get some answers to those questions. And as you interact, you pause to think and to listen. Right then, you're using assessment as you interpret what you see. In other words, make sense of it, and then you can take action by responding. Formative assessment is a continual, ongoing process that you're always engaged in while planning, teaching, and reflecting on how everything is working. It's not just a one-time event or something you do periodically. Use assessment each day as you engage with students, observing and documenting what they know and can do. The cycle of assessment supports your stance of persistent curiosity. Both formative and summative assessment are informed by the assessment cycle. You may remember earlier I mentioned using versus doing assessment. When you do assessment, you collect data and you report it. When you use assessment, you engage with the cycle daily, ensuring that you are more consistent, reliable, and responsive in the decisions you make. The cycle begins by asking questions. Wondering, being curious, staying open helps with objectivity. This quote by Donald Hoffman reminds me about subjectivity and objectivity. Take a moment to ponder it. He says, "We walk around believing that what we see with our eyes is real, when in truth, each of us constructs our own understanding of what we see." Let's listen as teachers describe how they use the first step of the assessment cycle, ask questions.
I begin by assessing before I even join children in the activity. I'll stand back and I'll observe and watch what they're doing. Hey bud, how's it going? What are you making? Can you tell me? And what materials they're using, how many kids are in the area, if they're communicating with one another, if they're sharing ideas, and just to see how they're working. It's really quite interesting to see how their minds work. Noah, how do you think this felt when you touched it, when you found that it was broken?
Sharp.
You think it was sharp.
Make sure to listen to what the kids are actually saying to you, because I feel a lot of times as a teacher, when you're one-on-one with a child, you don't really listen to their words, and you just you're thinking about 10 other things you need to get done in the class. And so if you really take the time to listen to what the child is telling you, you can get a lot of information about their learning and their process.
Ask questions to guide your observations and interactions throughout the day. Let's think about what it means to be an observer in the context of teaching. Observing is watching and listening with intention in order to make decisions about how to respond effectively. As you watch, listen, and interact, let's think about what we can learn. How they approach a task, how they use the materials, how they interact with you and with other children, what materials they gravitate toward, how they approach and solve problems. You might wonder, what can I learn about this child in this situation? How can I use what I know about the child in this situation to extend her learning? What learning is possible in this setting with this child? Observe in many ways. Take photographs of children as they work. Have conversations and jot down their words. Observe their drawings, paintings, block buildings, and other creations they make. Collages, for example, Play-Doh or clay structures. Step 2 in the cycle is to collect evidence, to answer the questions you pose, and at the same time find answers to questions you might not have thought to ask. Collecting evidence, what we also refer to as documenting children's learning, gives you objective evidence of children's learning that informs everything about your teaching. Relying on your memory is not professional. The evidence you collect guides day-to-day teaching, and provides you with information needed to use for formal assessment tools. It's also the centerpiece for conversations with children, colleagues, and families. Having a system for collecting evidence keeps you on track. There are methods and tools you can use day by day. Some teachers keep their evidence in folders, others in notebooks, and still others using an online system. While we emphasize powerful interactions, those one-on-one moments you have with children, you can also collect evidence throughout the day. You collect evidence from many different sources to find answers to questions about learning. Evidence is an outward sign or indication of something. Evidence consists of facts about children's learning and development. Sources of evidence come from classroom experiences, other educators, and of course from families. Each week during planning, teachers get organized for assessment. They decide who they'll observe and what experiences they want to document, and most importantly, how they'll manage this with their team. When collecting evidence, document facts. Train yourself to use action verbs: walked, ran, tapped, listened, watched, pointed, smiled, frowned. Use quotations. I want that marker. The cube is green. And try hard to avoid labels: shy, aggressive, creative, or the child's intentions. He wants to, she enjoys, she's eager to, he won't try. Avoid evaluations such as good job, beautiful work. Facts, first of all, ensure professionalism. They serve as evidence. For example, if I say, he knows one-to-one correspondence, this is an evaluation. But what does he do? He counts to 5, pointing to each object. If I said, he can't count with one-to-one, it's an evaluation. But with my previous example, he counts and points to objects to 5, I know that my next step in supporting him is to begin scaffolding him with 6. Let's watch and listen as teachers engage in collecting evidence of children's learning, step 2 of the assessment cycle.
We collect evidence of children's learning in many different ways, one of them being just anecdotal notes. Another one could be work samples of the children and writing down what they're saying to us. We might take a picture of them in the moment and write notes about what they're doing.
Whose wedding is it? Who's getting married? You're getting married?
The evidence might be a little bit different for each child based on what I want to learn, because with one particular child, he might not be very vocal, but if I can take a picture of him in the moment showing me what he can do, that's evidence right there of what he can do.
I think it is difficult sometimes to document everything in all areas of learning and development, and there were some kids that I had tons of work samples for, and other kids where I had like 1 or 2 work samples for. But when we notice that, we make sure that we are documenting their learning, whether it be with pictures, notes, whatever it may be. You know, his thought process about magnifying could have changed in the last 2 days.
And we need to, observe and focus on that continuation of his learning.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
I think that the kids knowing that you're listening to them and what they're saying is important, what they're doing is important, and writing it down, them seeing that really makes them feel good about what they're doing and that they get involved with it too.
How about if Maggie read 16 words that she had written down?
That's a great sentence.
Yeah? Think that sounds like a good sentence? Okay, that's what I'm going to write.
I find that when collecting evidence, it helps to separate your actual notes from the questions you might have, as you can see on this slide. That's another way to remain objective. You decide what to write and how much. This piece of evidence tells what, how, and when. It includes quotations and action verbs to tell what the child did and said. The teacher includes the back and forth of her prompts and scaffolds so that she has much more information about what the child knows and can do. When the evidence you collect is rich, you learn more about children. The more details you include, the more evidence you have. What you choose to save or record as evidence, we say should be rich. In other words, provide information with more than one single objective. In the first example, we see the child sitting beside his teacher. We know from the photo that he uses his right hand to draw and adds details. The observation simply tells us the same thing. In the second, richer example of evidence, the observation note conveys that he is speaking to the adult. This already gives us evidence of two more skills. He speaks easily and interacts with adults. Then we get a sample of his language and his vocabulary. By including what the teacher said and his response, we know that he is listening and responding appropriately. We also have information about what he knows about shapes, and we learn about his vocabulary. Be systematic about collecting evidence. Work as a team. Plan and organize. Create a system that's manageable for you. We often say if you have 20 children and there's 5 days in the week, that means focus on 4 children a day. Do reflection or enter your online data twice a week, maybe for 30 minutes, and use this as a reflection time. It's important to connect with your team at least 3 times each week, maybe for 10 or 20 minutes. When everyone on your teaching team is on the same page about the plans for observation and documentation, you can divide and conquer and be much more effective. When your documentation methods and tools are developed and ready to use, you're more likely to document what you need to capture evidence efficiently. When you have a plan for collecting evidence that you know is doable for you and your team, you're more likely to be consistent and follow through. Involve the children in collecting evidence. When you use assessment, children know that it's the norm and part of the classroom culture for you to be taking notes. When you're interacting with children and collecting evidence, get in the habit of asking children questions such as, how do I know what you can do? What do you want me to write down so that I can remember about what you know? And what do you want me to share with your family? Is there something else you want me to write down? Here's what I wrote about what you know. Is there anything else I should add? Collecting evidence, reflect on your practice. What are the ways you collect evidence of children's learning? How do you decide what work samples to collect? And how do you ensure that the work you collect shows children's individuality rather than collecting the same thing from all children? When and how do you annotate your work samples? Describe how you make sure you're able to collect evidence. What systems do you have in place so that the evidence you collect is useful to you? Interpreting evidence means thinking about what you are learning about children. You interpret evidence in order to understand its significance. This is where your research-based assessment instrument ensures that you have a clear criteria for making meaning of the evidence you've collected. Interpretation means figuring out what the evidence tells you about students' skills and knowledge that will inform next steps. Teachers interpret evidence in 2 ways. The first is to seize that teachable moment. In the moment, as a result of the evidence you collect, you can decide what to say or do that's responsive to the child.
How did you know what that word said?
Because I know the word build.
You know that word build already too? Oh my goodness. If I didn't know that word, that strategy that we just talked about using the pictures to help us, we already talked about this. It's the same picture as the cover, right? And you said that they were building with blocks that had letters on them. That picture would help me to understand that that word was build. My goodness, but you knew that word already.
The second way happens a few times each week and influences your lesson plans. This is later on, after the moment. At this later date, you can reflect about how the evidence you've collected connects to learning standards and to the child's performance and progress related to those standards. When you use assessment, you make meaning in formal and informal ways. When you set up the environment, as you interact with children, as you plan daily, weekly, and longer term. To evaluate at intervals to determine performance and progress, and most importantly, when you talk with families. Interpreting evidence helps you take action in the moment. In the moment, you may decide to respond to a child by emphasizing a vocabulary word, joining him to model a new skill or strategy, offering a suggestion, information, or guidance, deciding what open-ended question to use, encouraging the child to describe, explain, predict, compare, or contrast. You may choose to use mirror talk as feedback to describe, validate, or demonstrate a new vocabulary word. In Powerful Interactions, we talk about mirror talk, that's simply stating what you see out loud for the child. It's descriptive, specific, immediate, and frequent feedback that relates to a learning goal or to a standard. Mirror talk offers a child language to describe what they're thinking and is not evaluative. Let's listen to what teachers have to say about observing children and shifting gears based on what they're learning in the moment.
When I was observing the children working in the small group, I did notice I had to give some support to them around counting and making sure they were keeping track of what they were counting. I could see there was one child who had finished counting to kind of prompt her, okay, you finished that, now see if you can break it into the two sets, while I was continuing to pay attention to another child.
Jocelyn, you got it. You had that one because it was the 110.
Teachers also interpret data as they plan for instruction. Reviewing collected evidence helps you make informed decisions about lesson plans.
Planning my small groups, I look at my data and I interpret it to see where each group is, so I know how to plan specifically for each level of each child.
As Alana reflects on what she learned during the small group math lesson, she thinks about where she may need to slow down or how to help children to the next step.
As a result of working with Carlos right now, I can see, oh wow, I really want to work with him in a more dedicated way around just counting and keeping track of a smaller set of objects.
All right, Carlos, are you ready? We had one whole 10 frame, remember? So when you write that 10 frame, that's kind of like this big one over here. When we have that big one, how many was that? 10. Yeah, there's 10 inside, exactly. I called it 110. And so I write the number 1 here.
So from watching Carlos, the evidence shows me that I really want to work in a small group with Carlos just on counting a smaller set of objects. And that's something that I often will pull a small group to do during our choice time in the classroom.
These responsive strategies usually give you even more information and serve to extend a child's thinking and learning. Interpreting evidence after the fact is just as important as collecting it. One teacher said, "At first I used to just collect a lot of notes, and I really didn't know what to do with them. Now that I understand about interpretation, I use this important step to help me reflect. Sometimes that happens as I'm teaching, and other times it happens when I plan. I use my online assessment instrument to make preliminary ratings, and that really helps me to reflect. I see where the gaps are, what I still need to learn about children." Another teacher said, "When I take time to look at my notes and the children's work and compare that, I see indicators on my assessment instrument and often so much more than what I actually thought happened during the interaction. For example, a child used language and vocabulary that I didn't even anticipate. the child already knew a skill that I was planning to introduce. So studying my evidence and connecting it to standards, objectives, or indicators on the instrument helps me to know more about the child. Now step 4, take action, means using the interpreted evidence to guide decisions about instruction. You saw how interpret and take action go hand in hand, in the moment helping you to know what feedback to give a child. Taking action in the moment also helps you check for understanding. After the fact, you interpret the evidence again so that you can take action in meaningful ways. For example, after reviewing the evidence you have in a child's folder and maybe making preliminary ratings, you notice a gap, a place you need more evidence in order to make a rating. Perhaps you've only gathered a little bit of evidence about math, or maybe you notice a strength the child has that you didn't realize. When you look at your assessment data, you see trends in your class overall, and you can make plans for the large group, the small group, or daily routines, as well as individual children. This process of closing the loop is so important. Using assessment information helps you to close this loop. In contrast, doing assessment provides you with information. But then what happens? Teachers use all 4 steps of the assessment cycle throughout the day to ensure that they're making decisions that are informed to support children's learning and progress. You take action when you decide how to give feedback. Let's dig a bit deeper to think about how assessment can help you with feedback.
Knowing that I have to differentiate for each child, it's non-negotiable. It's something that I have to do regardless of where they're at. So knowing that they need to meet that standard and how I'm going to get there, that's something that takes a lot of planning and a lot of thinking and really being mindful of that child. That's what I have to do.
Joanna describes how she uses what she is learning from assessment to have meaningful conversations with families and to continue to learn with them.
When I meet with parents, I first want to make them feel comfortable. This is a nice opportunity to interact with them and show them evidence of the child's development. We've been practicing with animals today. And so first he made this one, which he wrote the letters out beautifully, tiger, and here's his Luca, and look at that U.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Because at the beginning of the year, he was doing 1,
Box
2, 3.
Yeah.
And then he did it again, and when he did this U, and I said, look at that, you didn't pick up your pencil once. Let's see if you can do it with a C.
Yep.
He then did it with a C, and he looks up with that big smile.
Totally.
And then I'd like to hear what they're like at home.
I'll say, do you want to write your name, or if you want to practice? And sometimes he says no, and I don't push it where I would have before.
Great.
And now he's asking me and saying, Mom, I want to practice my name. Mom, I want, can I draw? Can I color? And so we'll pull out the papers, and I'll say, do you want me to write the 15 numbers? And he says, yes, Mama, write the numbers so I can write my name next to it. And he's really excited when he does it.
I can say, we're working on this, and this is how you can help at home. If you have any suggestions, I would love to hear them. We're a team, and I like to make that clear to the child. I make it clear to the parent that we are all working to make the child be as successful as possible.
And he'll make a really nice U, and I'll say, look at that, oh my gosh. And then he runs and says, Dada, look at my U, look at my U. And so it's a big family thing in our house.
That's wonderful.
I think the most important thing about assessment is the day-to-day information that they get by just watching kids in the classroom, observing them, applying the skills that you've been teaching them all along, seeing how they interact with their peers, seeing if they can generalize things that you've taught them across multiple settings, what's really working and what's not, what to do next.
Look, it's a bigger crayon.
Look, it's a bigger crayon. Why do you think it's bigger?
Because I put it under.
You put it under the magnifying glass?
Wow, it's really bigger.
When you're using assessment rather than doing it, you're taking action when your observing turns into the feedback you offer children. Rather than our autopilot response of telling a child good job, we can offer feedback that's meaningful, that's specific and descriptive. immediate, and frequent. We might say, I notice that you're using the muscles in your hands to make sure that your drawing has details. That relates to a specific goal or standard. Or I might say, I can tell that you're making a real effort to add a lot of details to your story. Or I notice that you're pointing to the picture to help you figure out what word is on the page.
In front of our building, sometimes we play hopscotch.
See that little period there? That means you have to stop a little bit. So you say, watch Gina. Now you can start again.
First, she throws a stone into one of the blocks. Then she hops on one foot, that's hard.
You know what I saw here? When you got to this word, which I know was really hard, it's a little tricky, you looked at it, and I was thinking how easy it would be if you looked at just the beginning of it.
I did that.
Is that what you did?
Yeah.
So you knew that you could chunk that word, and then you had what?
With.
And then you had?
Out.
I think you've got it.
I know I counted how many more. I think it was 70. I said 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Then I counted to 70, then 80, then 90, then 100.
So you kept counting by tens in your head and you knew that it was 4 more groups that we would need.
When we offer children feedback that provides guidance rather than being evaluative, we're supporting the child's learning. When we take action after the fact, we're planning to consider what we've observed about individual children, groups of children, how children are using the classroom, how the schedule and routines are working, and we're applying those things to our lesson plans. When we use formative assessment, our lesson plans can't be used from year to year because children are different each year. Our lesson plans have to include information based on what we learn about children each day and how we plan to keep learning about them. We want to make sure that we're including in our plans who we're going to observe, when we plan to do it, and the questions that we want to answer. This important information that we include in our lesson plans helps us use assessment rather than doing it. Using formative assessment to make modifications to the classroom makes sure that we are being responsive to individual children and to our class as a whole. This is an aspect of assessment that often gets neglected. Observing to see how effective we are as teachers. If children are not doing so well, what adjustments do I as a teacher need to make? I may have to adapt the physical environment by moving furniture, changing materials, or altering the classroom ambiance. I might have to adjust the daily schedule and routines. I may have to plan a learning experience that's targeted to individual children's interests or their specific needs. I might have to plan to support a child's practice of a specific skill as part of a routine, for example, helping a child be more successful with a transition by offering guidance. When you rate children on checklists, be careful to avoid making ratings when you know you haven't offered them opportunities in certain areas to learn that skill. What this does is identify gaps in your curriculum, things you need to go back and observe for. On reports that aggregate your class ratings, you will see that all or many of your children do not have ratings in a particular area. When you're careful to avoid making ratings on children when you don't have sufficient evidence, you can then identify many children or some children who have been overlooked for different reasons. When you view a report that aggregates your ratings, you will see which children have the highest ratings and decide how to challenge them further and how to group them with other children who may benefit from this strength during collaborative small group work. When you view a report that aggregates your ratings, You also see children who have the lowest ratings, and you can decide how to support them and how to group them with children who may be able to support or scaffold them during collaborative small group work. Another way to use assessment to take action is to talk about thinking and learning with children. Use the words learning and thinking as you interact with them. Tell children what they're learning and why, and ask children what they've learned. This gives you more information and extends children's thinking, helps them to see themselves as thinkers, as active learners and problem solvers. One other way that you take action is by forming strong partnerships with families. How can a curious stance assist you in being a partner with families? Getting and giving information, exchanging information with families is so much more effective when you see each other as a true partner in supporting their child's learning. Wondering together promotes a climate of collaborative thinking and problem solving. A simple but very important principle to always remember is that when families recognize that you see and appreciate their child, they appreciate you. Staying open-minded and thoughtful helps you better understand families and helps you build more useful and productive relationships with them. Powerful interactions can make children and families feel heard, appreciated, and understood. You also take action when you engage with colleagues around formative assessment. Collaborate. Many principals and directors have established routines that support professional development and conversation that lead to improved child outcomes in their programs. Base dialogue on evidence. Teachers bring to meetings child outcome reports, observation notes, aggregated data. Be ready to study these reports together and discern patterns and look for more questions. They make connections between what they're seeing and the goals that the district has, and then begin identifying and defining strategies for achieving them. When teachers gather information through collaboration, they can go back to their classrooms or their schools and have further discussion, figuring out how everyone can benefit from these ongoing conversations. Building level conversations can take a variety of forms. Together, teachers can identify gaps and plan strategies to address challenges and issues. After you review your data alone or with a group, you come back to the assessment cycle. You begin by asking questions and moving toward collecting evidence. On your own, do this at least weekly, but don't be compelled to try to focus on all children each time. Focus on a few children each day and be systematic about it. What new questions do you have about individuals, your curriculum, objectives for the entire group? Plan how, when, and where to collect data. You might need to make recording sheets if necessary. Decide if you need to provide particular experiences to ensure that you're able to get the information you need. Remember, assessment is about professionalism. You are a decision maker. The more you use assessment, the more professional you are. This quote by Henry Brooke Adams reminds us of the importance of the teacher's role. A teacher affects eternity. She can never tell where her influence stops. I hope that after watching this presentation, you have new insights about using formative assessment. I encourage you to have conversations about these insights with colleagues, to experiment with a few ideas at a time, and perhaps to come back again and listen once more. Thank you so much for joining me.